Welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, your source for searing hot libertarian takes on the world's weekly headlines. Here's your host, Colt Thompson.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, episode number 28. Coming right back at you, trying to give you guys another rock-solid episode. Today, I am going to devote my podcast to recapping my thoughts on the previous Democratic nomination debate. In that debate, I guess I would point out that it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. I used to pronounce Nevada before I became a little more cultured when I was in university. My buddy was from Nevada, and he told me the pronunciation was, in fact, Nevada, not Nevada. But interestingly enough, while it was there, I think previously when Bernie Sanders was in the great state of Nevada, and particularly Las Vegas, is when he endured his heart attack that kind of came out of the blue and subsequently led to questions about his health and whether or not he was fit enough physically to hold the presidency in 2020 and 2021. Well, I guess, Bernie Sanders has come a long way from the heart attack, considering the fact that not just announced yesterday, Bernie Sanders has in fact won the primary in landslide fashion in the state of Nevada. So he bounced back with a vengeance. Turnout was relentless. And Bernie Sanders is grinning ear to ear at his, I guess, voter turnout and supremacy therein for winning the primary in the state of Nevada. Again, I just wanted to mention that Nevada was indeed the spot where Bernie, had this heart condition. So I guess it's quite the turnaround and a pretty good feel-good story for him and his campaign. Notwithstanding that news, I still want to shed some light on what happened during the Democratic debate. The field has been whittled down to a piddly 6 individuals. Not 3 or 4 months ago, there was roughly 15 to 20, somewhere in that wheelhouse. Some of the big names like Julian Castro, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Tulsi Gabbard, Steyer, Beyer, that billionaire type dude, a lot of them have fallen off the wagon, folded up the pup tent, and have moved along. So with the 6 people remaining on stage, all of them are white, with the exception of Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas. She's Native American. And so I guess 5 of the 6 are white, and then the Aboriginal there, Asian, Indian, Elizabeth Warren. So many of these candidates are indeed also very old. Klobuchar looks to be in her 50s. Buttigieg is the youngest, in his 30s, and then Biden, Sanders, Warren, and Bloomberg round out the septuagenarians, all in their 70s. 3 of the 4 names there in their upper 70s, almost that of 80 plus years old. Interesting demographic, that's for sure. I guess, these days the electorate is looking towards someone with life experience, and maybe people life experiences can proclaim messages that are a little bit more powerful, much like that of Bernie Sanders, who ended up winning the primary, as I mentioned before. So from the jump, I think the debate ran about 1 hour and 48 minutes, something to that tune. I think I watched about maybe a half of it. I think maybe between 45 minutes and 1 hour. Caught a few other highlights. Enough is enough, especially considering this podcast is a half hour, and I can talk about these clowns for probably 3 to 5 hours in a row. So I'm going to give you guys my thoughts. This entire debate centered around, from what I saw at least in the first half, Mike Bloomberg. So Bloomberg, as people know, was a late entry into the primary season, just throwing his name into the hat very late in the game, doing so after many of the big-time players dropped out. He, I don't know if this was his strategy from the onset and he had this up his sleeve, but what he ended up doing was he spent tens of millions of dollars of his own personal money, because he is worth a small fortune, actually a very large fortune. He's worth a hell of a lot more than Donald Trump. He's worth 10, 20, 30, 40, something in that range, billion. He's a billionaire. So he's way up there. He has a lot of money to throw around. I think I mentioned in a previous podcast that he, if he were to relinquish his candidacy and, fold up his own pup tent, he said he was going to pledge $1 billion to the potential or the secured nominee who's going against Donald Trump. I think Bloomberg is hell-bent on knocking Donald Trump out of office, whether it's through his own volition or his coin in support of another candidate. So he mentioned, Bloomberg did, that he was a New Yorker and he's tough and he could combat Donald Trump and he had the best opportunity to defeat Donald Trump. And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not going to speculate on that, but it was a very, very apparent that the 5 individuals on stage not named Mike Bloomberg had a visceral hatred and animosity towards him, both personally and professionally. I think he knew what was going to transpire. I think he knew he was going to catch a lot of flack, take a lot of heat for his earnings and his dealings and his business misgivings and his track record as a mayor of New York City. I mean, the guy's personal and professional life was pretty out in the open. There's been a lot of light shed on his conduct, and there was a lot of room for the candidates to jump in and really take hold of some of the things he may or may not have done or said and really use those things against him. So Warren, Biden, Sanders, Klobuchar, Mayor Pete, all of these people came at him with some serious veracity. I thought it was very, very interesting. I'm going to quickly rank who I think would be the best presidents of those 6. Ultimately, they are all very pathetic. It's a shame that we have a country where people are putting forth these ideas as if they're good ones, just completely ignoring the Constitution, ignoring free market economics, which has gotten us to be the most prosperous and wealthy country on the planet, and then ignoring the wars that are being fought overseas, and ultimately ignoring the debts and deficits we are incurring day in and day out by the millisecond as millions of dollars are flushed down the toilet, and modern day, everyday average Americans are being robbed of their purchasing power via the federal printing press. So big issues, of course, were not really discussed outside of healthcare in the first half of the debate. And of course, everyone's take on that issue was not very free market-esque at all, and was pretty, juvenile and very simplistic and wrong, immoral. I mean, everything they said pertaining to healthcare didn't make much sense at all, but that's pretty predictable. So giving my rankings here, and again, these are just, paltry, pathetic, terrible rankings. These are nothing that I would ever brag about, but I'm going to give it my all. I mean, the way I see the world is that individuals who lean more free market and private enterprise are the people that you want to go with. You want to, focus on that aspect of the economy, because once you see the private sector bleed into a certain industry, you always see an improvement, whereas the opposite occurs when the public sector gets their mitts more into some sort of industry. Usually see the eyesores and the ugly pains therein arise even more, even tenfold, infinite-fold. Every time government gets involved in anything, it ends up in a major disaster, catastrophe, or a really sluggish, disappointing results, much like Obamacare, much like every other federally mandated program and charade we have going on out there. So I guess my ranking is people who I think are a little more free market versus those who are a little bit more intervention-like in the economy. So we'll start top to bottom here. I think the worst candidate by far is Bernie Sanders. He would supremely end up in the 6th hole, and it should come as no surprise that I have him there, yet he ended up winning Nevada, and it seems like he is going to be the leading contender to take on Donald Trump. His message is insanely powerful. He appeals to people's visceral instincts and emotions, and of course, the lowest common denominator of stupid people not understanding basic supply and demand. So he has ignored economics, he has ignored constitutionality, and he has ignored basic morals ever since he was a young lad when he was proclaiming socialism as the way of the future, bragging about what was going on in Venezuela, bragging about the socialism in the Eastern Bloc. He did a lot of very creepy, weird things that turn around to what you would think would bite him, but indeed people have ignored that and championed his message and throw the word democratic in front of the name socialist, and that makes them feel better about his ideas because, again, they're very powerful. When you say you're going to forgive all student loans, you're going to offer people a job, you're going to tackle climate change, you're constantly harping about how you're not racist or sexist, and we need to clean up everybody's act. When you're, claiming moral superiority, of course, this is the ticket to garnering support. That's what it is. Democracy boils down to who's the most popular. And in this instance, what Bernie Sanders speaks about is the most popular. I mean, why wouldn't it be? If you didn't understand economics or the law of the land, well, of course this stuff is popular. I mean, it would be popular to me too if I didn't understand these things, but this is why I have the podcast, to let people know this is wrong. We shouldn't be going for this. It's going to culminate in a disaster for everybody, but, better the disaster happens, under Bernie Sanders' watch than that of some sort of Republican or Donald Trump, because we do not want capitalism to blame. We want to expose the issues of socialism, even if swallowing the medicine is very, very painful. So I have Bernie Sanders at number 6, that is, as far as worst out of the 6. In the 5 hole, I have Elizabeth Warren. So she's just a stone's throw away from Bernie Sanders. She's a little bit more of a lightweight, but she's pretty much proposing unmitigated socialism in every area of the economy she has. Discussed. I mean, she talks about her plans for everything. She's the woman who has a plan for that. I mean, those are the people you really need to watch out for. The people who have big, meticulous plans to take over the country. 350 million people. She has a plan for all of these people. For banking, for housing, for healthcare, for race relations, for education, for everything. Redoing our entire federal government. I don't know. I mean, she's just civil rights. I mean, anyone who has these type of plans, again, she pales in comparison to Bernie Sanders, but she's not super far behind. So I'll put her in the 5 hole. Number 4, 3, 2, and 1. They're kind of in the same breath here. Number 4 I put is Biden. I put him there because he has a track record of promoting socialism. I mean, he was excited about Obamacare, and he wants to embolden that and promulgate it further. So I think Joe Biden has to be there because he has this track record of abusing the federal power and using the federal government and the levers of the Leviathan, the monstrosity that is the federal government, to harm people, most notably the Affordable Health Care Act, which is both, unaffordable and not very healthy, considering it's not leading to better health outcomes in the United States. And people who are not being insured, of course, were getting punished until Trump removed the penalty. Thank God. So I'll put Biden number 4 just from his sheer actions and following along and being a tag along to Barack Obama, who he incessantly brings up because I think he wants to use Obama's popularity and fuse that into his own self and his image and his campaign to, jump up the ladder there and try to overtop Bernie Sanders, which hasn't really worked quite yet. I think the Joe Biden gaffes and the outbursts and the very awkward, bizarre things that come out of his mouth to show how his brain is running in weird directions because he's very old and potentially sort of senile. No more malarkey. And then number 3 I got, and 2 I think are really indistinguishable. It's Amy Klobuchar and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, however you say his name. Both Midwestern people, probably with the lowest profile of all the people aforementioned. They like to beat each other around a little bit and try to show these careful distinctions for which there's not many at all. I mean, they're both centrists, big government Democrat types, not quite as insane as Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, but more in the mold of Joe Biden. They just haven't really had their skin in the game to show that they're just as crazy as Joe Biden, so maybe they are not. Mayor Pete is clearly the best orator. He is the best speaker by far. He is very articulate. It probably has something to do with his age. He's a pseudo good-looking gentleman. I know he's gay, and I'm not afraid to say that. He's a decent-looking guy, but he it's weird because if he was not gay, I think he may actually be number 1 in all of this. I think he has an appeal because of his articulate nature and, he's very energetic. I think people definitely like that. But of course, these weirdos in the Midwest who found out that he was gay after they voted for him, I think they kind of regret that. You heard people saying it was very, very awkward. So who knows where the United States stands with electing a gay president. But again, I think he presents very, very well. And then Amy Klobuchar actually is probably my favorite from a personality perspective. Like I've said, every time you've heard her talk, she has a very good sense of humor. She's fun. Seems like a family-oriented person. Someone probably should have told her that if you're running for president of the United States, you might want to get your teeth fixed. It looked awfully brown and crooked. I mean, it doesn't take much money to get Invisalign. Maybe her congressional or senatorial salary could have helped her get some whiter, straighter teeth. That's going to be a pretty good appeal when you're kind of homely looking and older as a woman. Just it's a dose of reality for her. But otherwise, I mean, her little dig there about talking about Post-it notes being manufactured and invented in her home state because Elizabeth Warren said that her plan for healthcare was a mere Post-it note. Potentially that was true. There's probably a little bit of truth to that. Where there's smoke, there's fire. But again, I'd like to get a beer with her. She's pretty funny. I don't think she's the brightest bulb in the world, but I think she's pretty common sense. So I threw her in there at number 2. And then number 1, actually, the guy who got eviscerated the most, where the media is calling an absolute disaster for his performance as former mayor Mike Bloomberg. Bloomberg was a former Republican. Bloomberg understands that capitalism works. He is quick to call out that trying to socially engineer all aspects of the economy does not work. He employed probably thousands or tens of thousands of employees throughout his career. He became very, very rich, a self-made billionaire. He was pretty successful in terms of running New York City, the biggest and most diverse city in the country, as he alluded to in his debate. So, yeah, I mean, socialism and big government is obviously the direct opposite of what a libertarian free market type person should be longing for and advocate for. So, to the extent that someone up there has a little bit of sympathy for the free market, it's definitely Mayor Bloomberg. So, it's weird because he just kind of appeared out of nowhere. I'm at an age where when he was prominent in politics, I was not really paying attention all that much. It would have been cool to see him in his youth, how much more charismatic he was. I think he knew all the blows were going to be coming towards him, so he kind of kept his composure, calm, cool, collective. I kind of wish he wouldn't have been such a pussy and apologized about some of his previous programs as if they were such terrible things in the end of the world. I mean, that's exactly what you're doing. You're playing into the hands of the people on stage by doing that. Maybe perhaps he thinks he's exemplifying some sort of humility by doing that, and that is a version of leadership that people will accept. But I don't know. It seems it's hard to even say that's sincere considering all the things he's said and done in the past. You might as well just own up to it, but not really apologize, just kind of move along. I think he sort of did that at some points, but there's no reason for a pussification of your views and your track record because he has been very successful and accomplished in some ways in his career. So getting to the meat and potatoes of the debate, I think it was extremely funny when Elizabeth Warren kickstarted everything by, and I will mention this too, with Klobuchar and Warren, they love, the idea of getting a woman elected president. They're so hell-bent on that because someone has a vagina and a pair of tits. Like, that's an excellent thing. That's exactly what we need. We don't need a woman. We don't even need a man. We don't need any of these things. We just need someone who is effective. It doesn't matter who they are. It's just very, very bizarre. I mean, I think it makes sense if you're a woman and you're trying to appeal to women and you want to get elected just by saying we need a woman that's going to get people fired up. I understand that, but that's not the end-all be-all. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter. Who cares? It should not matter. It should not care. But of course, Warren and Klobuchar were on the attack, mostly Warren towards Bloomberg and how he's treated women. And she mentioned that he previously called women fat broads, or mentioned the fact that he called some women horse-faced lesbians, which are hilarious comments. And maybe they were. I mean, who really knows? But of course, he apologized or dodged, duck, dive, or dodged, as the movie Dodgeball says, around those things and didn't really hit them head on. I mean, she's bringing that up just to show that he's just some sort of evil man who doesn't like women. But of course, he's had a wife. He employs over 50% of women. He's done a lot more things for women than Elizabeth Warren ever has. But, a few stupid jokes or remarks can get you in some hot water. And that kind of brings me to this other point of all of this, is that with Bloomberg, they kept trying to bring up his past, whether it was Stop and Frisk, which is a program he implemented in New York City, and I'll dive into that in a second, or his past with how he treated women or workplace harassment or jokes. I mean, they really wanted to dig into that. That was a big thing that these people were doing. They wanted to mention how he was rich and he was a billionaire. They were really just trying to tear him to shreds. And this is everybody on stage. Every single person was taking, I wouldn't call it a cheap shot. I guess you could say it's a valid shot if you're in a Democratic debate where everyone really cares about race and people's money and not objectives, principles, or actionable items that people are trying to carry out to make the country a better place for everybody. Instead, they'd rather just have these talking points about, how we should look out for women and minorities. And Bloomberg is the antithesis to everything that is good with America. He hates, poor people, and he's very, very rich, and he's the equivalent of Donald Trump for the Democrats. I mean, all of this stuff is coming after him. I mean, it's very, very weird. The entire debate was just a bunch of pandering to minorities, black people, Latino people, women, all at the expense of Michael Bloomberg, which is hilarious. I mean, it's like the more things you accomplish in life, the more visceral hatred and envy and animosity come your way. The guy actually has some business experience and accomplished something in the private sector. He ran a city in which he enabled a stop and frisk program. By the way, I don't agree with it. That resulted in half of the murder rates over a few-year period. I think the murder rate plummeted from somewhere around 650 to 300 after the implementation of the stop and frisk policy. The big point was that Bloomberg asked his police force, the NYPD, to go into areas where there were blacks and Latinos, because this is where most of the crime was, and do the stop and frisk program. Now, what he was saying was aggressive, and I don't believe in it at all. I don't believe in, warrantless search and seizure and just looking at someone, assuming that they're some sort of felon or criminal. Obviously, what he did worked, and there's, some common sense behind why that might work. Of course, it did. Is it racist? Yes. Did it work? Yes. So I think he had a little bit of a mealy-mouthed apology about the entire thing. If the goal of the mayorship of New York City and the NYPD is to reduce murders, they certainly achieved that goal. And it is not really racist to look into areas where more murders happen. If they happen to be mostly or predominantly African-American or Latino, well, that's just common sense. It's not racist. That's identifying a statistic and going after that statistic. My personal problem with that is mostly, if someone's doing no harm and walking, down the street, I don't think they need to be harassed or, searched for any reason at all, unless they're, being violent or doing something particularly shady. That's my view on the whole thing. But, I could see where his logic was there. And then, of course, he has, some sort of half-hearted apology. And then above and beyond that, they're talking about how he has a few non-disclosure agreements signed. And Elizabeth Warren was hitting him hard with all of this stuff. And I know Bernie Sanders mentioned a few of those things. But, and I quickly will point out that I thought it was really funny that Bloomberg at one point said to Bernie Sanders, or at least he said to the audience, he said that it's funny that the America's most famous socialist has 3 mansions, essentially. And he was pointing at Bernie Sanders. And of course, Bernie was furious at that. And Bernie's always angry. I mean, it's so funny. It is not a surprise that Donald Trump, is the leader of the Republicans, and now Bernie Sanders is the leader of the Democrats. They're the most angry, miserable people when they're speaking on social media and whatnot. They're not very, peaceable people. They're not very open-minded people when viewing the other opinions of so many other people their entire lives. They spent their entire lives being angry and miserable and building a brand off that, and you're tapping into people's emotions. The truth of the matter is neither of them know why the electorate is actually in a bad position, why they're angry. They have no idea. They don't understand the market. But that anger and that passion sells everywhere in life. It really, really does, especially with that powerful message that Bernie Sanders puts forth on the, the ever increasingly young voter base. And again, I want to circle back to the non-disclosure agreement that Elizabeth Warren kept bringing up. So apparently, I don't know how many he has. He wouldn't be very forthcoming with it because Elizabeth Warren put him on the spot, and Bloomberg sort of just kind of nodded and didn't really say much. But whether he has 5 or 15, Bloomberg has non-disclosure agreements signed with women who were previously employed by him or his company, where he may have made a sexist or sexual harassment, or I don't know what he did, made some sort of remark that was inappropriate at the time. Allegedly, I mean, who really knows what was actually said? And these women signed these agreements, which essentially was hush money for them not to open up or say anything during this campaign. Believe me, somebody will say something. There will be a rat in one of these campaigns, maybe the Bernie Sanders campaign or Joe Biden or someone. Someone will get someone to talk. Believe me, something will happen to Mayor Bloomberg. There's no way this is bottled up all the way until November if he sticks around that long. There's just no way. But I don't know why non-disclosure agreements, the health of people, their tax returns, I don't know why all of these things are so fucking focused on. I get that we want to know what happened, and I get that we want to know people's health, and all of these questions are legitimate. But these debates are more about what the policy should be, what we should do to fix this nation. Where did we go wrong? How can we get better? What can we do to improve the life of people who are poor, down and out, who want to achieve the American dream? Constantly haranguing someone about a non-disclosure agreement that he will not break. He's not going to break the agreement out to people. He's not going to change his mind. So what is the point? I mean, just to make him look like a bad guy? I mean, you can Google these things and find them out relatively easily. You're wasting your time. All of these people attacking Bloomberg, to me, are wasting their time. They should be speaking strongly and vehemently against a couple of things he did and move along. Don't be questioning the guy. You're not going to get anything out of him. Don't give him the floor. Shut him up. say something rude and don't even give an opportunity to speak. Then move along and talk about your points, your message that you want to sell to the American public. That's what you should be doing, because in democracy, what is popular is what gets you elected. And you have to be a salesman. That's what you're doing. It's easy to be a salesman when you're promising free things like Bernie Sanders, hence why he won Nevada. You're appealing to stupid people who don't understand things and, are upset by something in the economy. And perhaps they feel they're a little bit more morally superior than other people and they have this giant heart. Okay, it's easier to sell that. It's impossible to sell liberty and free markets when you're living in a world where people just don't understand these things, because there's this giant welfare state around us and generous amount of goods and, an overstock of supermarkets and overstock of experiences and all of these good things that people are laying around enjoying and they take for granted. It's really hard to sell the reasons why we have these things. It's very, very difficult. The American people don't want the truth. They like the truth about what's wrong. They don't like the truth about what causes things to go wrong. And that's just the way we are here in America. So the entire thing was just a shit show on Michael Bloomberg with a stop and frisk, a lot of pandering to the minorities at the expense of Mayor Bloomberg. And what I thought was funny too, again, was, despite the haymakers being thrown at Bloomberg and him maintaining his composure, I thought it was kind of funny that people were, heckling Bernie Sanders about his supporters, who are indeed probably the worst people on Twitter and social media. There's no question about that. Just objectively, you see how these people talk, and they're out in they're all space cadets, like all the things that they believe, and their whole left is best act and everything is kind of like creepy because they're just so uneducated and ignorant, but they want to force all these things down people's throat and just really take over the entire United States. It's fucking bizarre. The people who know the least want to foist their ideas all over the country. It's very, very scary. But what I thought was funny is the whole culinary union thing, and Bernie Sanders was defending his people and their remarks about the culinary union and all these very, very bizarre things about how he has a 30-year track record of supporting unions and union leadership and all these things. But this is just a big giant racket. I mean, he talks about special interests and lobbies. I mean, to the extent that unions have any power anymore, I mean, that's what he's doing. They're born out of government power. These unions are allowed to exist because of government laws. So he's supporting the people who run the unions, who the government allows to essentially create these unions within the private sector. So you have essentially someone strong-arming America, or at least the unionized workers of America, and strong-arming the employers of the unionized workers of America through the powers of government. So, of course, Bernie Sanders is going to support people who have government backing. It's very, very weird. I mean, I would want to distance myself from that if I were a candidate. I'm not going to support the union people who are pushing up the wages of certain peoples in certain industries and crowding out people who want to have opportunity or get on that bottom rung of the ladder. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, thank God unionization has plummeted in the United States, but I'm trying to get this all in here in under a half hour. So I'm kind of looking. I said that Biden, was riding the coattails of Obama because he knows deep down inside that should help him out with some of the minority voters and people who got energized when Barack Obama was elected president. It was pretty funny when A.B. Klobuchar was put on the spot about, the Mexican president. That was sort of her Gary Johnson libertarian, what is Aleppo moment. She did not know who the president of Mexico was, apparently, in some previous interview. Of course, the Latino correspondent on stage asked her that question, and she just said, we're all human and people forget things. And then Mayor Pete pointed out how she was on some sort of committee or some sort of subcommittee of something or another to do with immigration at the border, and she should know that. And she mentioned something about Uzmaka, but that was just kind of trivial, stupid part of the debate. But I'm just kind of going through my notes here really, really quick. And, I pretty much mentioned everything that I wanted to mention. I ranked some of these guys based on their, how free market they are, which means in my eyes, whoever's more free market in this situation is really the best candidate. But again, it's just a pathetic group of people here. And I think the American public, I just think we're destined for some sort of bankruptcy, some sort of financial catastrophe. I don't think we're going in the right direction. I mean, I think as a country, we need to have rapid decentralization. I think we need some sort of secession. I mean, all this polarization and just being at each other's throats, over all these ways of how we're going to redistribute something that somebody's not somebody's belongings to begin with. I mean, all it is we're just discussing finances because, the undergird of healthcare and education and all of these policies in the United States is just finances. It's just money. So this entire debate is over this giant piggy bank that's already smashed with nothing in it to begin with about how we're going to spend these resources and why we're going to spend them because it's someone's idea that maybe we should do something because they're so altruistic. It's very, very bizarre. I mean, Let money be in the hands of private businesses, of individuals, of families, and let them make their own decisions. Let them live freely. Let them live bountifully. And with the twisted irony of all that is that it'll provide the things that the Democrats and stage say they want. They want higher wages for people and more opportunity for people, and for people to be lifted out of poverty, in air quotes. Well, allow them to be left to their own devices with their income, what they decide to do with their life. Allow them to make these decisions in a marketplace full of ideas and opportunity, because that is the way in which all of us will prosper. And I thank you guys very much for listening to episode number 28 of Millennials Meet Liberty. And I will see you guys next time for episode number 29. Thank you.